So my name's Tina Copenace, and I'm from Niisaachewan First Nation community. Actually, I was born in Kenora, and my First Nation was originally Wareagle, Mackenzie Portage, Obosh, and at one time they were all one community, Dolls, Obosh, Gondagon, and Rat Portage, so it was ABC. So I feel a deep connection to the Niisaachewan community. And I was born in 1962, and I went to residential school at Cecilia Jeffrey from a young age, 5 to 6 years old. And I grew up on Obosh Gondagon First Nation, and that's just outside of Keewatin. And my clan is Makwa, the Bear Clan. I went to Cecilia Jeffrey residential school in Kenora, Ontario, when I was 5 to 6, so I went there for approximately one school year. So I guess you could say 4 seasons. I went to CJ. I would say probably about good 30 kilometers. So it's a good walk. I don't think you'd walk it as a child in a day. Probably take you overnight anyways. My mom went to residential school. Actually, she went to St. Mary's. My grandmother went to residential school as well. She went to St. Mary's. They might have attended a little bit at Cecilia Jeffrey, but I'm not sure. And I do know that, but my younger siblings didn't go. So, because I'm 10 years older than my youngest sibling, so. There was a lot of kids in that school, as far as I know, from all the way from grade 1 to grade 12. So if you look at all the communities, there was like 15, I believe, that attended there. So times maybe 100 from each community. So, you know, maybe between 1,500 and 2,000 children. So I was one of those 1,500 approximately. I just knew my family members, my cousins that were there. I had aunts that attended there. I had an uncle. Some of my extended family that my aunts and uncles married into, I knew them from living on the First Nation prior to. So I did know some of them, and they were older than me at the time. Okay, well, when I went to residential school, I attended right on Cecilia Jeffrey. I slept there, but I actually went to school off of Cecilia Jeffrey, which was very unique experience than others. I went to Rabbit Lake School. It was a public school. And I remember going there and taking classes. I went on the school bus, and it was probably about 1 kilometer from Cecilia Jeffrey. And there's a facility that's there now. It's called William Creighton. So I attended public school there. And also I went to Brownies, which was another unique experience that a lot of other children didn't go to. And I would go to the Brownies, and we'd have different activities, and yeah, twice a week, I believe. And then I had a lot of activities that I remember when I went there. And the hockey games, I remember getting gum in my hair, and I didn't give up my gum. I was at a hockey game, and I decided I was going to keep it. In the morning, I had a big wad of gum, and I remember getting up and cutting my hair. And of course, you know, that wasn't looked at lightly by the people that were watching us. And I remember a lot of the kids that I went with were older than me. And they used to have this walkathon. It was 25, I don't know if it was miles at the time or kilometers, but it was a long walk. And I did that walk when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And it was a rainy, cold day, and that's a lot of kilometers for a child to walk. And we were raising money for something I don't remember, but it was called the walkathon. And I remember a lady from Shoal Lake 39, when I couldn't walk anymore, she carried me on her back, like piggyback, and we took turns like that. So it was older crew that I was with. And we did make the finish line. That's at Valley Drive, I think. That's where it is, where they ended the walkathon. So those are some of my experiences. And because I was fairer than a lot of the other children there, I didn't realize that the treatment we had, or I had, there was just a maybe small group of us girls, that we had privileges that other kids didn't have. So as a result of that experience, it wasn't really a good time for us on the playground at Cecilia Jeffrey, because the kids would, obviously say, why did you get, extra cookie or whatever it might be. So later on, I discovered we were the kids that were paraded out when the officials used to come to check up on the residential school. But I'm not sure of it because I didn't look at the history part of that, but I kind of figure there was a purpose for why I went to Cecilia Jeffrey and went to public school. Well, I lost my language because when I first went there, my first language was Anishinaabe. I spoke Ojibwe fluently. I had to learn English there, which was very difficult when you understood Anishinaabe. And of course, the traditional part of the culture, like the rice picking and the blueberry picking, we used to go trapping and hunting and fishing. So that traditional component was not there anymore when I attended Cecilia Jeffrey. I guess the biggest one would be the language, which is really unfortunate because we learned a lot to be shameful of speaking our language. They instilled in that we had to just speak English. So I never thought of it before until I got much older when my kids were already speaking English. That was unfortunate we didn't pass that on to our kids. I just think like with everything else, because my husband also went to residential school. So of course there's that intergenerational, I guess, effects of residential school that we both had. And then our relationships, like even with our own families. So it's fragmented because my mom didn't have the opportunity to display affection. So that's the hardest part, I guess. A lot of people don't understand about showing love to your kids because they took that away from our parents. Well, yeah, it does have impact, especially like in social media and in news of what's occurring across Canada about kids being found in tragic ways because, we are survivors of that. So it's just kind of like we're much gratitude to be here, and then the families that have lost families and they never came home, that's, obviously impacts us too. Well, I've really strived to try to keep my culture intact by going to ceremonies, learning the language, picking up classes, sharing the culture with our family and our daughters. I like to think that I still have the culture and the ceremonies and learning the language. Bigi at the good Anishinaabe one. I just want to be the change I want to see and instill that and be a good parent to my children and to ensure that they never have to experience what we did. Going to residential school, meaning like losing our language and the culture and just being away from our families and our community, because it does affect us in the long run. So that's what I want to let my kids know, so they could be proud of who they are as Anishinaabe people. Reconciliation is important to me, both ways. So you have to put action into your words and to truly reconcile that. And I was in attendance at I think it's the Lakeside Inn when the apology took place, and it was much needed that we needed to hear that because we need Canada to know that this should never happen again, and we need to have it in our history books, and it needs to be written by our people. Well, but I didn't really actually go home. It was kind of like a process for my family to get me back and some of our family members back. They had to move off the reserve into Keewatin, which is not far from Kenora, and they had to rent a unit because I guess the policies back then, in order to get your kids back, you had to be kind of like a mainstream society member. So I didn't actually move back home until much years later. Well, when I was in my community, I felt a lot of freedom there, to do like, the harvesting. I remember, picking wild rice with my mom and my aunts and harvesting that and hearing the stories, eating the food like the moose meat, and we used to have like fish. And because my grandfather was a traditional hunter and trapper, they would skin a lot of animals, and we would learn about all that. So it was exciting to come home and just, okay, this is what I missed, was the food and the language, and just celebrating being Anishinaabe at home in the community. So that was great. What I could say is what I did with my kids is I try to do better and improve myself and get educated and be independent, because that's one thing my mom always told me, like that's what we learned in residential school, to be survivors, to be independent and not to rely on anybody. And I think it takes a lot of strength to do that. And I find like in our communities, like it's easy to be dependent, but we could be independent as much as we want. We are like strong and resilient Anishinaabe people. Well, we filled out our forms for Indian residential school, and I wrote just some of my experiences. If you want to call, it pain and emotional distress, it's mental, just being home, away from home, because I experienced a lot of physical problems too, where I had bedwetting. I didn't understand why I was in the school, even though like I said, I was treated fairly well. But I had to follow rules just like all the other children. We went to bed early. We had our meals set, and we did what we were told. So I think of the government apology was much needed, and it was like we were waiting for a long time. And then the Pope recently apologized, and we were waiting for that to happen too. So I think it was like it's good to have that in acknowledged for our history, so nobody can come back and say it never happened, because it did. Because there's a lot of naysayers that say that residential school didn't happen, but it did happen. And I was there, so I could say very much it did happen. So I'm glad the apology did happen. Well, I'm a mother of 6. Well, I had 6 children. There's 5 living now. I have grandchildren, and I went to school, achieved that. I'm very proud of that. I have my master's degree, and I'm a social worker. I work in our First Nation communities with individuals, families, and communities with Indigenous people, with Inuit people, Métis, and Indigenous. So that's part of my family. And I own my own house in Kenora. We worked hard to do that. We worked hard all our lives. And I've been married for 39 years to the same individual. And you're going to probably hear from him soon too. I just like to see a bigger vision with regards to reconciliation, to bring our culture and language back. Like even this room here where we're sitting, I think this is an early years room. I really like to bring elders together, and a daycare in that setting, so the elders could give back and vice versa. Because I know our elders are lonely too in some of these nursing homes, and they've been impacted by residential school, the isolation, and that parenting. So we need to help each other in that regard. And I always had this vision of this bigger building, so we can all have a common place to come and then share our gifts with each other and our teachings. I guess the legacy would be be proud of who we are as Anishinaabe people, and to have the language available to us, and to have it available. I know it's difficult. Living in the mainstream society, I find it hard. But for myself, working in First Nation communities, I try more and more to do that. And I think it's a good idea to practice our culture and not to forget who we are and where we come from. And that's one thing my grandmother told me, is be proud of who you are and never forget where you came from. And that's from Treaty 3 here.